As leaders in life, whether it be in ministry, business, or even your own family, many times we feel the pressure to do it all. But here's a truth I want to give you today. Great leadership is not about doing everything yourself. There's a great benefit in knowing how to delegate and learning how to empower others to step up and building a team that can carry out the mission with you. Delegation is not just a practical leadership skill, it's a spiritual principle, and we see this throughout the scriptures. Today I want to give you several concepts and practical tips under the topic of delegation. First, we're going to deal with the importance of delegation. Let's start by defining what delegation actually is. Delegation is the act of assigning responsibility to someone else. It is when you see people in their strengths and you use their strengths to accomplish a task that serves the mission or purpose. It's important to remember that effective delegation really taps into the God-given gifts and abilities that people already have. When we delegate, we're not just lightening our own load or making it easier on us as a leader. Instead, we're giving others the opportunity to grow and to contribute to the vision. One of the clearest examples in Scripture comes from the story of Moses. You may be familiar with Exodus 18, but Moses was overwhelmed with the burden of leading the entire nation of Israel. It was a great task that God had called him to do. Now, he got some advice from his father-in-law, Jethro. And Jethro told him, he said, I'm going to give you this advice. And he told him that what he should do is seek out able men that fear God. And then he was going to place over them then that responsibility. There would be rulers of thousands and rulers of hundreds and rulers of 50s and rulers of 10s. And what he was doing is he was challenging Moses to learn how to delegate the tasks that were before him. It wasn't just about Moses letting go of responsibilities. It was about creating a sustainable leadership structure that allowed other people to step up in their roles and for them to then grow as leaders. You see, God was in what was taking place in that day. Delegation doesn't mean giving up your control as a leader. It means sharing the responsibility and learning to trust your team to use the gifts, the talents, the abilities that they have for the mission at hand. So again, delegation isn't just some practical principle that we just pull out of life. It's a spiritual principle that actually empowers other people. Next, I want to explain why delegation matters. So let's talk about why delegation is so important. First of all, it does lighten your load. But more importantly than just lightening your load as a leader, it empowers your team to grow. You see, as a leader, you're not just responsible for accomplishing tasks, to check off the list and say, okay, this is all done. You're also responsible for developing the people around you. That's what leaders do. Most people have the mindset that, well, as long as I took care of my business, as long as I look good, or as long as, I got myself ready, I did my job. But when you come to the realization that your responsibility as a leader is not just for you to get yourself ready, it's also for you to help other people better prepare to be their best and to get themselves ready. That is when you will begin to understand, wow, I need to learn to delegate and prepare other people better. Imagine what happens if you were to delegate wisely. Think of a task. Think of an objective you're trying to accomplish. If you will delegate wisely, tasks will get done more efficiently. People will feel valued because they were able to contribute. And you as the leader are now going to have more time to focus on the big picture, the vision that God has given to you. So it's important to understand that, if you will delegate correctly and you'll understand this spiritual concept, you're no longer going to be bogged down into the details. Instead, you're going to be able to live out leading with purpose. See, leaders have to be out and in front. A lot of people don't delegate well because they don't get out in front. So don't let the work bottleneck at your desk. Moses was not delegating just to avoid work. He was delegating to build other leaders by raising up leaders that were over the thousands and the hundreds and the 50s and the 10s. He was making sure that the people were cared for. There were big things happening there, and he couldn't deal with everything. So these decisions were made quickly, and the nation was then able to continue to thrive. Where is the ministry, or where is your work, or where is your, fill in the blank, your family suffering because you're not willing to delegate appropriately? Delegation is not about doing less. It's about building leaders who do more. Number 3 is the practical tips for effective delegation. Let's get into this practical. How do you delegate effectively? There are really 3 key tips that I want to give you today so that you can delegate like a real leader. Number 1 is this: identify the right people for the job. You have to know your team. When you get to know your team, you will realize that everyone has strengths. Everyone has weaknesses. People have spiritual gifts if they're saved. And it's your job as the leader to identify who is best suited for each of the tasks. So when Jethro was talking to Moses and he said, look out for able men, those that fear God. Delegation wasn't just some random thing. He didn't go eeny, meeny, miny, mo and just throw people into the spot where they were going to serve. It was strategic. When you delegate, you need to ask yourself, who has the skills? Who has the passion? Who has the spiritual maturity to handle the task that needs to be done? There are some very low entry jobs where there's not many requirements for somebody to do it. Get people plugged in so they can be a part of the work. Match the right person to the right job, and you can then set them up for success. When you delegate, not only do you need to know your team, but number 2, you need to give clear instructions and expectations. As a leader, you must learn to communicate clearly. Delegation doesn't mean that you just disappear and hope for the best. Well, I assign that task. No. It means you set clear expectations, providing guidance, and here's what it is. You check in regularly with those people. You can't just assign a task and never think of it again. As a leader, you still need to see it through. Jethro didn't tell Moses, oh, just hand off the work, Moses. He told him to train and prepare the leaders. Who is it that you are investing in to be the next leader? When you delegate, make sure that your team knows exactly what's expected. Talk to them about what the goals are. Explain to them when the work needs to be done. Have the due date set out in front. Make sure you give them the resources they need to accomplish the task. Remember, people can't succeed if they don't know what success looks like. Set people up for success by being specific and clear in your communication. People can't read your mind. You may think people know you and know your plan, but if you don't communicate it, you are hurting your team and you are stunting their growth where they cannot reach their potential. The third practical tip that I want to give you is that you need to trust and empower your team. Sometimes delegation can be kind of scary. When you give up what you feel like is that control and now you're expecting somebody else to take and run with something. It's important to learn to trust your team. So once you've delegated, step back and let them take ownership. Don't micromanage. Trust that you have chosen the right person for the right job and then give them space to succeed. Just like Moses trusted the leaders he appointed, you need to learn to trust your team to carry out those responsibilities. When you give people room to grow, they will. They'll rise to the occasion. Empowering others is a sign of leadership strength, not weakness. I understand the topic of delegation definitely comes with its challenges. Sometimes delegation has this stigma that combines the topic of delegation with laziness. People think, oh, they just delegate because they're lazy and don't want to do it themselves. But what I want you to understand is this. They're really different concepts. There are people who are leaders that are lazy. But just because you learn to delegate doesn't mean that you're lazy. So let's compare delegation versus laziness. First of all, understand the difference. Delegation is not laziness. Just because someone else does a task doesn't mean that you're lazy for letting them do that. Someone who's lazy is really someone who's avoiding work altogether. Delegation is more about sharing the load and sharing it wisely. It's an opportunity to empower others while you're still guiding the mission. You're still helping people along the way. You're still developing those people who are maybe underneath you or a part of your team. Proverbs 18:9 talks about that idea of those that are slothful in his work are going to be brother to those that are a great waster. It's the idea of those two will pair up together. So laziness and waste will go hand in hand. Laziness leads to waste, and a lazy leader is one who doesn't care about the outcome. Maybe they just care about themselves, or they just do what pleases them in the moment. But a leader who delegates properly is actually one who takes on responsibility. They don't avoid responsibility. A willing leader is one who's ready to work hard, to serve alongside their team, but also someone who knows when it's proper to empower other people. Delegation is not laziness. I feel like I can't say it enough. It's about distributing responsibilities so that everyone can grow and succeed. So yes, laziness will lead to waste, but delegation builds success. We started off by saying that delegation is a spiritual concept, and that's very true. So we need to trust God's design when it comes to leadership. Delegation activates God's given gifts inside of God's people. Delegation is not just some smart leadership tool, it's a part of God's design within the church. For me, I'm trying to train people and help people when it comes to the area of ministry so that we can be the best for Christ in His church. But again, a lot of these principles tie in with how you lead your family, how you handle your business, how you work in groups of people. But Ephesians 4:12 gives us this idea talking about the church. And it's the idea that the leaders in church, they're supposed to be equipping the saints and the building up of the body of Christ. So when we delegate, what we're doing is this: we're activating what God has already placed inside of other people. Delegation allows for others to use their gifts, talents, and abilities for God's work. It's more than just about getting tasks done. That's not what the church is about. It's about equipping other people to grow and to contribute in the work of the ministry. So when you delegate, you're not stepping back from leadership. Instead, you're actually stepping into God's plan for raising up the next generation of leaders. You're actually empowering others to grow into the roles that God has called them to be in. I'm personally burdened to see this next generation step up in their hour. I want to see this generation be ready to lead. God is needing people to step up and to stand out for the cause of Christ, not in a carnal way, but in a spiritual way. However, this is never going to happen if we don't allow them to bear that yoke in their youth. So don't rob this generation of their future reward because you're not willing to prepare the way for them to take the reins. And if you're of the younger generation, now is the time for you to rise up, for you to decide by the grace of God, I want to be a part of this. I want to do what I can do, and allow God to use you in the areas in which He can use you. Building a legacy of leadership can be done through delegation. Delegation doesn't just focus on today. It's really about building for the future. So when you delegate, you're creating future leaders who will carry on the mission long after you're gone. If the Lord tarries, I'm not going to be around while the work of God continues. So we need to train this generation to lead for their day and for their hour. Think about it. Remember we talked about Moses? Well, Moses and Joshua are great examples. Moses didn't just delegate tasks. Instead, he mentored, he discipled, and prepared Joshua to lead Israel into the promised land. So delegation does allow you to build what we would say is sustainable leadership. It's about making sure that the vision, the work of God, it doesn't just end with you. And we know that it's the Lord's work, but it allows us to continue to grow and flourish with the next generation. The ministry must go on. So when you delegate, you're not just getting things done. You're building leaders for the future. Invest in this next generation. You are creating a leadership legacy that can outlast you. But will you do what it takes to learn to delegate and not just let go and let it be, but delegate in a way that you help that person step up and have success? Now, my personal opinion is delegation is actually one of the most powerful tools in leadership. It's not about doing less, it's about building more. It's you seeing what you should do for the glory of God, but then also seeing the gifts, talents, and abilities of others and where they can get in on the work. When you delegate wisely, you empower your team. You may lighten your load in some areas, and you build a legacy of leadership that will last. Delegation is leadership in action. It's about equipping others, trusting their abilities, and guiding them to experience success. Let's lead with wisdom. Let's delegate with purpose. And let's watch as God uses our leadership to grow His church. We want to be yielded to Him. And one of the things He gives us is that style of delegation. Even Jesus Himself did that. He wasn't the one when He fed the 5,000 that went and brought the food to every person. Instead, He allowed people to get involved in the work. And when they got involved in the work, they got to see God at work. We have an opportunity to do that. So empower your team. Trust the process. Learn to delegate appropriately. This is all from our ministry education here and some of the leadership and event planning that we've been talking about. I'd love for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay up to date on the latest helps that can help strengthen and grow your leadership and ministry influence. Do me a favor, hit the like button and then share this with someone who you believe wants to take their ministry to the next level for the glory of God. Thanks for joining me today. Be strong in the ministry and serve the Lord with gladness.